In this tutorial, we'll build a responsive HTML email template. So the two column section is going to collapse into a single column section, while the rest of the template will remain in single column form. So at the bottom, we have social media icons, some links, the two column sections, a single column section with a heading, text, and button, as well as a banner and header with the logo at the very top. And let me show you how it's going to appear in dark mode on the Gmail app on my iPhone. So you can see the single column layout as I scroll through with the images, the text buttons, and the social icons at the bottom, with the colors inverting and still giving a nice shade of brown, with the background being that dark brown shade. And you may have noticed that the two column section is actually going to reverse once it's down to the single column layout. So you'll see that the image is now going to be in front of the text, while at the full width at 600 pixels, the image for the two column section in the second of the two columns will be on the right. So now that we've gotten a good look at the design, in order to get started with the tutorial, in the description of this video, I have a download for these starter files to get us started with index.html, as well as with the images we'll need to build the template. Before moving over to our text editor though, which I'm going to use Visual Studio Code for, let me show you some tests with this email template. So looking through the email client preview here with the tests of the template we're about to build, we'll find that most of the email clients will render the template properly. However, it's not going to render properly in all testable email clients. So I have the ones that it will render properly showing here, but this doesn't include all testable clients. So to put it into perspective, I'm going to show you how you can watch a preview to a course that I have called HTML Email Mastery in just a moment. And in that course, we spent an hour and a half on the email boilerplate to make sure that it renders properly across all email clients. And you can check out the preview as well as watch the first 4 videos if you check out the sales page with the HTML file promoting my course included in the starter files. But back to putting it into perspective. So the boilerplate section I mentioned is an hour and a half long section inside of the 16-hour course. So this beginner design that we build in this tutorial will set you up nicely if you decide to take the course. So even though this email template will render across a lot of email clients for us, I just wanted to bring that to your attention because the detail included in the course with troubleshooting and all the rest is quite different than what we'll cover in this beginner tutorial. So I'm going to bring the starter files back up, and you may notice that I have index.html open in the background in my text editor, which is Visual Studio Code. We also have all of the images and icons included in the image folder for us to participate in the tutorial. And I'll have these starter files open up in my workspace in Visual Studio Code. But if you're new to Visual Studio Code or using a text editor, you can check out a tutorial on my channel on VS Code. You can also use a different text editor if you want. Using VS Code makes it easy for us to access the images and to see our project live as we're building it in Google Chrome. So if I close the sidebar with Command B and select the Go Live button in the lower right-hand corner to start the live server extension feature, it's going to open up in Chrome. So now anything that we add to our HTML, we'll be able to see live with autosave while we're laying out our HTML email template. So now if I take a look in Chrome, there I have the hello text displaying already. Okay, so let me go over what I've included for us to get started in this index.html file. So from the top, we have our HTML5 document type with doctype HTML. We have our HTML tag, which spans the entire document, including our head and body tags inside of them. So here in the head section, we have some standard HTML5 meta tags like UTF-8 for characters and numbers, Internet Explorer Edge compatibility, the initial scale 1 meta tag for mobile devices. Then we have the title of the email template, which isn't necessary when we're sending it. Unless we want to include a live version on the web, we can have a title like a web page. In the head section, we also have the start of an internal style sheet with these CSS resets where we zero out certain elements like body with margin 0, border spacing 0 to the table, padding 0 to table data tags, and border 0 to images. With these resets making it so we don't have any unnecessary or unwanted space in email clients, I'll also mention that this is a pretty standard boilerplate. We're not going that in depth. While in my HTML email course, we spend an hour and a half on the boilerplate. So I just want to let you know that there's more that can be added in order to develop for all email clients, but we'll do it with as little code as possible for the tutorial. You'll also notice that I've got some CSS selectors started for us for elements that we're going to be adding as we lay out our HTML. This also includes the Poppins font from fonts.google.com, which is the font style that we're seeing with the headings as well as the paragraph, text, and buttons. So we'll include the Poppins font when we lay out our font family CSS. There are also two elements started for us. The first one is this center element with a class wrapper. So this is going to center our email template on the page using the HTML4 center tag, which is still valid in HTML email. And we're going to be using for simplicity of centering the template for the tutorial. Also included is the main table with that main class set at a width of 100%, which will be the actual table containing the template design that we see without the background color. So let's get rid of this hello heading 1 and start the table row and table data tag inside of our table, which is the order in which elements go while working with tables. And I'll add a new heading 1 with the hello text once again. So our heading text is going to look the same, but with the addition of the table row and table data tags, we'll be able to start to see the template take form as we style the wrapper and main classes. So let's start doing that now with the CSS selector for wrapper I've included. So I'm going to start with width 100% for the wrapper to make sure we're taking up 100% of the browser in this case, but also the email client when we see it there. I'll also add table layout fixed. So what this is going to do is contain the main table using that main class within our wrapper element. We can also apply the background color, and the hex for this is DA D4CB. So this is going to give us the tan, brown, yellow, earth tone color that we're seeing off to the side of the template as well as on the bottom. So let's apply that space to the bottom now while we're here. So there we see the color, but I'm going to add padding bottom 60 pixels, which is what I typically do with email templates because I like the look of having a little bit of the background color space underneath the 600 pixel width template, which is what we're going to start styling now with the main class. So for that main class, we're going to start off with width 100% like we did with the wrapper. So it takes up 100% of the space within the wrapper. Then we're going to give it a maximum width of 600 pixels. This way, it stays at width 100% underneath 600 pixels and makes it responsive. So let's add that max width 600. Then what we can do is apply a background color to this as well. So I'm going to use the hex value FCF9F5, which is the off-white tan earth tone shade, and now we can start to see the template take form with the width being responsive underneath 600 pixels, and we can tell that it is because it isn't overflowing outside of the browser window. Next, let's add some shadow to the template off to the sides using box shadow. So I'll add box shadow with values of 0 horizontal, 0 vertical, and a 25 pixel radius, so we're just seeing the blur of it, with all black for red, green, blue with zeros. Then for the alpha value in red, green, blue alpha, if we just have it at 1, we'll have the black blur radius at the 25 pixels, but 0.15 is going to be nice and subtle with just a slight shadow, but you can change that to your liking. Next, for the text color, let's make it a softer shade with 44413D as the hex value, which is a dark gray shade instead of having it black. So if I remove that, changing it back to 000, then add it back, you can see the subtle difference. And all of our text is going to be centered throughout the template, so we can simply add text align center here. Then the last bit of CSS I'll add for the main class is let's change the font family to reflect the Google font that's added beneath, which is the Poppins font. So we'll just include that in a single quote. then we can add a comma and add a fallback. So I'll use Arial Helvetica, sans serif, and there we have the Poppins font appearing in bold because it's a heading. I've also just realized that I have some classes here that aren't actually needed. So the social and social media classes we can delete. We're not going to need those when we lay out our social icons. That's all of our CSS for now until we get down to the content section with the text and headings as well as the button. So let's move on to the header section, which has the Kasha Decor logo now inside of our HTML, replacing the hello text. So we can just delete the table row altogether. Then let's start a new table row and a table data tag inside of it using the right angle bracket. Then we can use brackets to add attributes using the Emmet feature in VS Code. So I'll add the style attribute and hit enter, and there we have our two elements. We'll style the TD tag in just a moment. Let's add our link, which is going to have an image inside of it. All of our images in the email will be inside of links. For the attributes, let's add alt, width, and style, then source will be included for us. And I'm going to leave the link blank with a hashtag, but you can add a web address here to your website or any link that you want. Just remember to include actual links instead of the blank link with a hashtag when an email newsletter is actually sent. Now for the image source, this is going to be inside of the image folder, and it'll be kashadecorheader.jpg. So now if we take a look at it, we're going to see it displaying at its full size because we haven't given it a width yet. So we'll apply a width which is the same as the main table, which is 600 pixels. We don't need to include px or pixels when we set a width inside of an attribute. Right now though, we'll have a fixed width, so it's not going to be responsive. So in order to make it responsive, we'll include max width 100%, which is sort of the opposite CSS that we did for our main table class. So this is going to keep it contained inside of the template. We could also set a width of 100%, but I prefer to keep the width attribute with a fixed value, as the width attribute is necessary for some email clients with images. So you'll notice that there's a small line underneath the image, and in order to get rid of that, what we can do is add line height 0 CSS to the surrounding table data tag to get rid of the inherent space of our image wrapped with the link. Next, we have the banner image appearing beneath the header, and this is one of the few opportunities where we'll be able to use the same HTML. So let's simply copy this table row to table row and paste it in for the banner image. Then once I correct the indentation, the only change that we'll need to make is the image file path. So we'll use banner.png. And the reason it's a transparent PNG image is because we have some transparency on the bottom of it. And we'll also include that line height 0. So the white space off to the sides of the new arrivals button is the transparency. That makes it so we'll be able to see the dark mode color where the white space is now. Let's move on to the title, text, and button section, which I have an HTML comment for. In this section, we're going to have some padding to the top, bottom, the left, and the right. So let's add that inside of our table data tag. So we'll include the style attribute. Then inside of our table data tag, we'll have an additional table with the width attribute. So once you hit enter, let's add the padding for the first table data tag. So as I mentioned, we're going to have padding on all sides. So we'll have 25 pixels on the top to separate it from the banner. We'll have 15 pixels on either side. So I'll add 15. Then the third value is going to be 40 pixels on the bottom before the border. So we have 15 pixels on both sides. Then for the width, for the table, let's add 100%. And inside of the table, I'll add some spacing. We're going to have an additional set of table row and table data tags, just like the content that we added above. So our content will be inside of a table row and table data tag for the heading, the paragraph separately, and the button once we get to it. So let's add that heading here with a heading 1, and we'll have a span tag inside of it so we can make some of the text a different color with the style attribute. So the color for the home text will be different, and the hex value we'll use for that is 775830, which is going to be sort of a lighter brown shade. So in between the span tags, we'll add home, Then after the span tag, we'll include a space and add the rest of the heading text, which is where you make it. So once you type out home is where you make it, we'll be able to see that text in our version showing up in bold because it's a heading and it's larger than the finished version. So we'll come back to the styling of the heading in line. Let's move on to the paragraph text though underneath it. So for this paragraph text, like I mentioned before we started the heading, we're going to start a new table row because separating our content like this in different table rows will give us more consistent spacing across email clients. So inside of our TD, let's add the paragraph tag as well, and we can include the style attribute for that too. So let's add our padding. I'm going to add 15 pixels on the top and bottom to separate it from the heading and the button, then 25 pixels left-right to add some more spacing than the actual table data tag that this is nested within. Then for the text here in VS Code, if you just type in lorem and hit enter once it shows up, you'll have some dummy text which can take up similar space to the text that I'm going to paste from the finished version. So let me replace this lorem text. Then I'm going to change the font size for this text to make it a little smaller with 14 pixels. So once that change is made, we'll see that the text looks closer to the finished version, except for we'll need to adjust the spacing. So both the line height to the paragraph text, as well as the spacing around it, as well as the heading. But I'm going to add some line height here to separate our paragraph lines a bit with line height 23 pixels. And let's get rid of some inherent text spacing on the top and bottom of our paragraph block with margin 0. So once we add that, you'll be able to see the paragraph block shift closer to the heading with less space underneath it. So we'll apply that to the heading as well to remove the extra space. Let's add the button first though, so we can add the styling for both the heading and the button at the same time. So we'll start a new table row and table data tag inside of that with the style attribute. Then I'm going to add padding of 20 pixels top, 0 left right, and 10 pixels bottom. And for our button inside of this, we're just going to use a link or anchor tag with a class button so we can reference it in our internal style sheet, but we'll add some inline style as well with the style attribute. So with that added, let me add the couch collection text, and it doesn't have to be uppercase here because we'll add that text transform uppercase CSS. But I'm going to change the color while we're here to the 534C46 hex value. So we're going to be inlining the CSS for this button anyways using the button class. But if you'd like to see which email clients respond to internal style sheets before inlining the CSS, which is covered in my email mastery course, you can try to send the email template before it's inlined and just look at the difference in the button. I should also mention here that in order to really build a proper button that renders properly across all email clients with things like border radius, we would need to use something called vector markup language, which is covered in my email mastery course. So that's covered with building buttons as well as other elements inside of the course. So let's add our styling for the heading 1. We could have included the styling just inline because there's just a little bit of styling, but we'll reference the heading 1 element itself because it's the only one in the template when we style it in our internal style sheet. The first thing that I'm going to do is remove the margin like we did with the paragraph tag. So that's going to correct the spacing around the heading 1. And I'll also reduce the font size to 24 pixels and change the font weight to 400, which is regular, from the 700 bold heading font weight. So now if we toggle back and forth between our version and the finished version, it's looking pretty close. There's a slight difference in the spacing underneath the banner because I don't think I had line height 0 to the banner in the original. But let's move on to the button styling. Starting with text decoration none to get rid of the buttons underline or the links underline. Then text transform uppercase to make all of the characters uppercase like the original. Then font size 14 pixels, so I'm going to reduce it to the same font size as the paragraph text from 16 pixels. And the border is going to be 2 pixels solid 7F7 86E for the hex. Then let's add some padding. So I'll add 10 pixels top, bottom, 30 pixels left, right. And in order for the spacing underneath the button or the padding to hold up, we'll need to make it a block element. So we'll add display inline block instead of having it an inline element, with the difference of display inline block and block being that we can display elements next to one another with inline block, but it still gives us control over the padding around the element, like a block element. Then for the background color of the button, we're going to use an off-white shade, which sort of has the gray, or the tan rather, yellow. So I might need to just grab the hex value using the color picker that I have in my browser here. So I'll grab it from this button that's included sort of in the image, which is clickable, and paste that in. So now we'll have a matching color with that F4E DE4 hex value. And lastly, for this section, we have a border on the bottom. So I included an HTML comment for that. But what we can do instead of having a whole new section just for that border is we can just add border bottom to the previous table data tag right here. So I'll add border bottom 4 pixels solid. And let's see how the 44413D hex value looks. We may need to change it slightly. So it looks like it's a little wider than the original. So I'm going to reduce it to 3 pixels from 4. And let's change that hex value to 775830. Okay, so now we should be matching up. Apart from that slight bit of spacing above the heading, we are matching the original. So let's get started with the first of our 2 column sections after getting rid of this border HTML comment. And we're going to lay out the first column, including the image on the left and the loyalty plan text. So let's start off with a new table row, table data tag with the style attribute. Then inside of that table data tag, we're going to have a new table with the width attribute. So once you have that added and hit enter, let's add some padding to the top and bottom of our 2 column section. So we'll have it up here beneath the border as well as between it and the next 2 columns. So I'll add 30 pixels on top, 0 left, right, and 5 pixels bottom. Then for the table width, we'll give that a width of 100%. And let's add some spacing so we can add our table row and table data tag, which is going to be a wrapper basically for the 2 column section itself before we actually get to the column. And we'll give this a class called 2-columns to reference it in our internal style sheet. And inside of this, we'll have the first of our 2 columns using a table tag because that's next in order inside of a TD. And this is going to be for the image column on the left, before adding another on the right with the same class called column. And inside of this, we'll have a new set of table row and table data tags, which we're going to give a class to called padding. So we'll need this for padding around each one of our columns before we actually add our content, so the content in each one of our columns doesn't get too close to one another. So once you add that, add some space in between the opening and closing table data tag for the padding. Now we'll have our last table, which we're going to give a class called content, which will have our content rows inside of it for each one of the content rows, like the heading, the paragraph text, and the button. But in this case, for the first column, we'll just have the image. So our image is going to be inside of a link with the A tag, then IMG, and we'll give it the attributes, source, alt, and width. So once you have all of this added, hit enter, and I'll correct the indentation with the link and image on a new line. Then let's add some HTML comments just so we can make this easier on ourselves. So I'll make this the end of the content. Then for the TD underneath that, that'll be the end of the padding. Then the table will be the end of the column, so the first of 2 columns. Then we have the 2 columns class rather, which is sort of a wrapper. So N2 columns or N2 column section. And it's not best practice to leave the comments in your HTML when actually sending an email, but we'll do it here for learning purposes so we can identify our content. So let's take that first column with the opening table class column down to the closing tag, and we can just add a second one for the loyalty plan column after that. So copy it, then paste it underneath. Now what we can do is take care of our content. So we'll get on to the second column. Let's take care of this first image though. So I'm going to leave it blank with a hashtag. Then the image source will be img/kasha-col1. So now if we take a look and refresh, and that's actually the second image, so I'll just make that col2. And we can correct the width, so I'm going to make it 260 pixels, which means we'll end up with 20 pixels of spacing on either side of the image with our added padding once we get to it within the 300 pixel column. So let's move on to the content for our second column now. So let's move on underneath the table class content, and I'm going to get rid of the image with the link so we can add the loyalty plan text, which is inside of a heading 2. So H2 loyalty plan. Then for the next bit of content, which will be our paragraph text, we're going to start a new table row. And having a new table row and table data tag for it is going to keep the spacing more consistent across email clients. You can use more lorem ipsum text like we covered in the first paragraph section. I'm just going to paste in the original text. Then for the last table row and table data tag, we'll have the button. So this will be a new link, and I'm going to give it a class called button, like we did with the first button. I'll leave the link blank with the hashtag, add the read more text, and because we already added CSS for this button class, it should already be styled for us, which it is. And in my notes though, just like the first one, I have the color added. So I'm going to add that here, which is color, then the hex value 534C46. So now we have all of our content set for that first and second column of the first of the two column sections. So what we can do is move on down to the second set of two columns with the new beginnings text and the image that's on the right, at least for the full screen version, which is going to be displaying first for us on mobile. So let's copy all of this HTML for the first of our two column sections so we can save ourselves some time and change the content as well as the direction of our column so the image displays first on mobile. So make sure you correct the indentation once you paste that in. Let's change the content, then we'll take care of the direction of the columns. So I'll add this paragraph text and the heading. For the heading, it's new beginnings instead of loyalty plan, but the button can stay the same. Before we get to changing the direction of our columns, we'll need to actually see them set up in the two column format with our CSS. So let's start referencing the classes that we added after we change the heading styling, similar to what we did with the heading 1. Let's make it a regular font weight and we'll remove the additional spacing around it. So let's reduce it to 24 pixels first. Then let's change the font weight to 400. And I'll remove the margin or spacing around it with margin 0. And that 24 pixels might actually be the original size for the heading 2. So moving on to the classes that we've added for the two columns wrapper, let's add some additional padding on the bottom. So I'll do 0 top, 0 left, right, and 15 pixels on the bottom. So moving on to our columns. So let's give this a width of 100% for each one of our columns, of which we have 4 within the two column wrappers. And with our columns at 300 pixels in width, it's unlikely that we're going to have a screen size that goes beneath that, but as a best practice, I like to set a max width for the columns instead of using width, and this is going to make it responsive up to 300 pixels. Then to get our tables with the column class displaying next to one another, we'll add display inline block. But in order for them to actually be next to one another, because as you can see they're not, what we'll need to do is add font size 0 to the two columns class This will get rid of some invisible table spacing in order to allow us to have the tables displaying next to one another. Then vertical align middle is going to allow us to have the content displaying in the middle of the column's height next to the image. So it'll take the height of the image, which is the taller content block, and display the other content in the middle of that. So let's bring back the paragraph text by adding font size 16 pixels to the content class, because we added that font size 0, which got rid of it. And I'll also adjust the line height with line height 22 pixels. And you may remember I mentioned that our content is going to be pushed off to the sides of the column. So to correct that, we'll need to add the padding to the padding class we added. So let's add padding of 20 pixels. So we have 20 pixels on either side of both the image and the text content. The spacing between the columns is more than I anticipated though, so let's remove this additional padding on the bottom of the two columns class. Then let's correct that second image before we get to changing the direction. So that's going to be col 1. Now let's go about changing the direction of our columns. So the image still displays first on mobile, but we have the text on the left at the full screen width. So to do that, let's go up to the first of our tables for the two column section 2. And I'm going to add the dir attribute for direction with it set to right to left instead of auto or left to right. So now we have the text content and button on the left. You'll notice though that we have the period for that paragraph text displaying on the left. So it's displaying properly aside from that content issue. So what we would do in this case is go to the table class column and add direction left to right. So the actual table is going to be right to left, but the content inside of that is going to be left to right. So this one for the first column with the image didn't have any effect because the image is going to display in the same direction either way. So we'll just need to apply this to the second column where we have our content with the text. And that has corrected the period, so it's now displaying on the right. So I'm going to actually reduce the padding a little bit more between the columns. So for the second one, let's reduce the padding on top to 10 pixels. Then I'll add a little more padding on the bottom with 15 pixels. And the original also has a border on the bottom of this section. So we'll add border bottom 3 pixels solid with the hex value 775830. So similar to the previous HTML comment added for a border, I'm going to remove the second one before the footer section. So that leaves us with just the social media icons and the links at the bottom of our template with the last border too. So we'll start off the footer section similar to how we started off the last few sections with the table row, the table data tag, then the table inside of it. So you can start from scratch or paste it in from a previous section. I'll get rid of the padding with padding 0. Then for the border bottom, it's going to be thicker than the others, so I'll make it 5 pixels, and we don't need the direction attribute. Then we'll need to close out these tags, so we'll add the closing table, TD, and table row. So let's take a look at what we have with the border added. And the border is a little thicker, so I'm going to reduce that by 2 pixels. I'm going to make it 3 pixels, and we'll see how that looks in a bit. So let's start off a table row and table data tag for our content. We'll include the style attribute for the table data tag. Then for padding, I'm going to add 35 pixels on the top and bottom and 20 pixels on the left and right, just in case on smaller screens. So on small screens, our content doesn't get too close to the edges. So let's start off our first social icon with the image inside of the link, just like the other images. Then for the attributes, we'll add source, alt, width, and style. I'll leave the link blank with a hashtag. Then for the image source, it'll be img/facebook.png for this first one. And the width is 50 pixels. Then border 0 for our styling to make sure that there aren't any boxy borders added around our circular social icons. Then this is going to be the same, so we can just paste this in 3 times for the other social icons. And let me just show you how the icon looks at its full size. So you can see we have the dots and there's a little space around it. So we'll change the second one to Instagram, then Twitter X or Twitter-X, and YouTube. So now we're looking just like the original. So let's compare. So the icons look good, but the border is still a little off. So I'll change that back to 4 pixels. Then let's add the links that appear underneath of it within the same table row for our content. So we'll use a paragraph tag with the style attribute, then a link inside of it that also has the style attribute. I'll add padding of 3 pixels all around the first paragraph for some additional spacing between that and the content on the top and the bottom. So 3 pixels of padding all around, a blank link. And because it's a link, let's include color with the hex value 4413D so it doesn't appear blue. I'll add the kashadecor.com URL. And we still just need to remove the underline with text decoration none. Okay, so that's looking good. We already have it in all caps. You can also use text transform uppercase. So I'm going to paste this in for the second link. I'll change the text to say subscriber preferences, and you may notice that the font size is smaller for the subscriber preferences link. So instead of having that padding, let's remove the padding and change the font size to 14 pixels. And with that, that's our last line of HTML with the CSS. So let's take a look at the finished template. So we have our social icon in the footer, the 2 column sections, the banner header at the top with the content and the call to action button, along with the collapsing 2 columns. And of course, the image showing up on top for that second one with the use of the direction attribute. So before the email template can actually be sent to inboxes, we'll need to have the images online. So as I showed you early on in the tutorial, this email template that we just built, which is appearing in Gmail, has the images uploaded to the web, so they're live links instead of the local links from the image folder. So let me give you a few resources to get your images uploaded to the web. I also cover this in my HTML email mastery course, even though live links are provided for all of the images used throughout the course. The first resource I'll share is imgbb.com, which is the easiest to use, and they give you direct links to the images which you can add in your HTML. You can also just do a search for free image hosting to see similar platforms. Another resource you could use is a free email service provider like MailChimp, which you can use to send email newsletters, but they also allow you to upload content in the form of images, which you can get direct links for to add to your HTML. Before you send your HTML email template in a platform like MailChimp, though, you'll need the CSS inlined because the CSS that we added in the internal style sheet isn't in our HTML elements yet. Another good practice, as I mentioned previously, would be to remove the HTML comments. But you can use this free CSS inliner from MailChimp. Just paste in your code, then hit convert. And as you see, we'll have all of the CSS from the internal style sheet added to the HTML elements, so it's ready for sending. And if you'd like to test to see how your HTML email looks inside of your inbox, you can go to putsmail.com. You'll just need to create a free account, then punch in the email that you want to send it to in recipients, paste in the HTML. You can do it before or after inlining it because they have a inline feature. You just check the box, and remember to add a subject line after the recipients, as I mentioned, and you can send that email to your own email address for testing, which is what I use to send the email template to my own Gmail address, as we saw at the beginning of the tutorial, also featured on my phone in the Gmail app with dark mode. So thank you for participating in the tutorial. Remember to check out my HTML email mastery course. You can see the HTML file and the PDF for a preview of the course, as well as coupon links, which are linked here in the HTML version, as well as in the PDF with the latest coupon code. So thanks again for watching. Remember to like the video, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and I'll see you in the next video.